Montana Territory, 1875. The unforgiving winter winds howled across the snow-covered plains outside of Whiteridge, a frontier town clinging to existence between civilization and wilderness. The cold had a way of stripping everything bare: trees, emotions, and the pretenses people wore in warmer seasons. For Jackson Aldridge, the 26-year-old rancher with eyes the color of summer skies and shoulders broadened by years of honest labor, winter meant surviving another season of solitude. "A man makes his own way out here," Jackson muttered to himself as he secured his gelding outside the general store. The words were a mantra he'd adopted after the fire 2 years prior, the one that claimed his parents and their original homestead, leaving him alone to rebuild from ashes. No sense in dragging anyone else into this life. His ranch was modest but growing: 30 head of cattle, a sturdy cabin, and land with potential. What he lacked was companionship beyond his loyal cattle dog. But Jackson had convinced himself that loneliness was preferable to loss. The frontier had already taken too much from him. He wouldn't risk his heart again. The bell above the general store door announced his entrance. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, greeted him with the familiarity of small-town commerce. "Jackson, thought you might not make it in before the next storm." "Cutting it close," Jackson admitted, stomping snow from his boots. "Need supplies to last through February." As he handed over his list, the store door swung open again, bringing with it a flurry of snow and a figure bundled against the cold. When the newcomer unwrapped her scarf, Jackson found himself staring at a young woman he'd never seen before. She couldn't have been more than 22, with hair the color of honey wheat falling in waves past her shoulders. Her blue calico dress had seen better days, and her coat was worn thin at the elbows, but she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Miss Sinclair," Peterson acknowledged with a nod. "Your order's ready." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." Her voice carried the refined lilt of Eastern education, incongruous with her threadbare clothing. Jackson pretended to study the seed catalog as Peterson tallied the woman's modest purchases. He couldn't help but notice her counting out coins with careful precision, her expression falling slightly at the total. "Perhaps next time on the sugar," she said softly, sliding the package back across the counter. "Put it on my account," Jackson heard himself say before he'd even formed the thought. Both Peterson and the woman turned to him in surprise. "That's very kind, sir, but unnecessary." Her green eyes flashed with something between gratitude and indignation. "I can manage my own affairs." "Never suggested otherwise, Mississippi. Just offering a neighborly gesture." "I'm not your charity case," she declared, chin tilting upward. "I haven't come west to be rescued." Jackson felt an unexpected smile tug at his lips. "And I haven't offered rescue. Just sugar." Something in her expression softened fractionally. "Then I thank you for the sugar, Mr. Aldridge." "Jackson Aldridge." "Victoria Sinclair," she replied. "Recently of Boston, currently of the schoolhouse cabin." The realization struck him. "You're the new schoolteacher." "I am." She accepted the sugar package with graceful reluctance. "And I pay my debts, Mr. Aldridge. You can expect repayment." As she gathered her purchases and moved toward the door, Jackson found himself saying, "Perhaps you could repay me by joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening, as a proper welcome to Whiteridge." Victoria paused, her hand on the door. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "6 o'clock, Mr. Aldridge. And do understand, this is merely repayment, not courtship." The door closed behind her, leaving Jackson bewildered by his own actions. He'd avoided social engagements since the fire, had built walls higher than his cabin around his heart. Yet something about Victoria Sinclair's proud determination had momentarily cracked his resolve. "She's a tough one," Peterson commented, returning to Jackson's order. "Arrived on the stagecoach last month. Town council nearly didn't hire her. Too young, they said. But she's got more book learning than the rest of us combined. Why would a Boston lady come to teach in Whiteridge?" Jackson wondered aloud. Peterson shrugged. "Some say she's running from something. Others figure she's another Easterner with romantic notions about taming the frontier." He paused, giving Jackson a knowing look. "But I'd wager she's as alone out here as you are, son." Jackson dismissed the observation with a grunt, but as he loaded his supplies, he couldn't shake the image of those proud green eyes, or the way Victoria's declaration, "I'm not your charity case," had stirred something long dormant within him. At precisely 6 o'clock, Jackson entered the modest hotel restaurant, hat in hand, hair still damp from his hasty wash in the bathhouse. Victoria was already seated, her honey blonde hair neatly pinned, wearing the same blue calico dress, but with a crocheted shawl added for propriety. "You're punctual, Mr. Aldridge," she observed as he sat across from her. "Ranch work teaches that, Miss Sinclair. The cows don't wait if you're running behind." For the first time, he saw a genuine smile touch her lips. A practical philosophy. Their conversation began awkwardly, but soon found rhythm. Victoria spoke of Boston, of her teaching at a girls' school there, and her decision to answer the advertisement for a frontier educator. "But why Montana?" Jackson asked as they finished their simple meal of beef stew and biscuits. Surely there were teaching positions closer to civilization. Victoria's gaze dropped momentarily to her hands. "I needed a fresh start. As far from Boston society as possible. Running from something? Running towards something," she corrected. "Independence. The chance to build a life entirely my own." She studied him with sudden intensity. "And you, Mr. Aldridge? Have you always been in Whiteridge?" Jackson found himself sharing the story of his parents' immigration from Tennessee, their homestead, and eventually, the fire. He hadn't spoken of it to anyone since the funerals. "So you rebuilt alone," Victoria said softly when he finished. "It's simpler that way." Simpler, perhaps. But is it better? The question lingered between them, unanswered. When they parted ways outside the hotel, Jackson felt strangely unsettled, as though Victoria Sinclair had somehow seen past the walls he'd so carefully constructed. "Thank you for the dinner, Mr. Aldridge," she said formally. "I consider my debt for the sugar paid in full." "It was my pleasure, Miss Sinclair." As she turned to leave, Jackson surprised himself again. "The schoolhouse roof. I noticed it needs patching before spring rains. I could take a look if you'd allow it." Victoria hesitated. That would be the town council's responsibility. They're overworked men with their own homesteads. "I have experience with roofing." She regarded him with that measuring gaze again. "Very well. Sunday afternoon, if that suits. But understand this is not charity," he finished for her with a slight smile. "Consider it an investment in our town's future." The following Sunday, Jackson arrived at the one-room schoolhouse carrying tools and roofing materials. Victoria emerged from the small attached living quarters, her hair braided simply down her back, wearing a practical brown skirt and white blouse. "You actually came," she said, sounding somewhat surprised. "I said I would." Jackson set down his supplies. "Do you often find men don't keep their word in Boston?" A shadow passed over her face. "More often than I care to remember." They worked together through the afternoon, Jackson on the roof, while Victoria handed up supplies from below. Occasionally, children from town would ride by, curious about their teacher's Sunday visitor, and she would wave them on with good-natured authority. As the winter sun began its early descent, Jackson secured the last patch and climbed down the ladder. His shirt was damp with exertion despite the cold. "You've done remarkable work," Victoria observed, studying the repaired roof. "Please, at least let me offer you coffee before you leave." Inside her modest quarters, Jackson was struck by how she'd transformed the Spartan space. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes he recognized as far too advanced for frontier children. Botanical sketches decorated another wall, and a small desk held neat stacks of papers. "You've brought a piece of Boston with you," he commented, accepting the steaming cup she offered. "Just the parts worth keeping," Victoria replied, settling across from him. "The rest I was glad to leave behind." "And what parts weren't worth keeping, if you don't mind my asking?" Victoria's fingers tightened around her cup. "The expectations, the constraints, the understanding that a woman's primary value lies in her marriage prospects." She met his gaze directly. "My father arranged a match with a business associate, a man 30 years my senior with 2 previous wives in the ground." Jackson's brow furrowed. "You ran rather than marry?" "I chose freedom over security. My father made it clear I would be disowned if I refused the match, so I simply disappeared." A wry smile touched her lips. "Hence my fierce independence. I have no safety net, Mr. Aldridge. No family fortunes to fall back upon." "That took courage," Jackson said quietly. "Or foolishness." Victoria sipped her coffee. "The frontier is less forgiving than I imagined." "It can be, but it also rewards determination." Jackson found himself studying the delicate curve of her jaw, the resolve in her posture. And you have that in abundance. As do you. Rebuilding after such loss. Her voice softened. Is that why you keep to yourself? Fear of losing again. The question struck too close to the truth, and Jackson set down his cup. It's getting dark. I should see to my horse. Victoria didn't press him, but as she walked him to the door, she said, Thank you for the roof, Mr. Aldridge. The children will be warmer for your efforts. Jackson, he corrected impulsively. If we're to be neighbors, you might as well use my given name. She smiled, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes. Then you must call me Victoria. Though only outside school hours, I must maintain some authority with my students. As Jackson rode home through the gathering dusk, he found himself thinking of Victoria's story, her courage in forging a new path. It struck an uncomfortable parallel to his own situation. But while she had fled towards something, he had withdrawn from everything. The realization troubled him more than he cared to admit. The harsh Montana winter gradually surrendered to spring. Jackson's visits to town became more frequent, always with practical excuses, supplies, mail, banking, but invariably including brief encounters with Victoria. Sometimes just a passing greeting on the street, occasionally longer conversations after Sunday services. The townsfolk noticed. Whiteridge was too small for secrets, and the attention paid to the handsome young rancher and the pretty schoolteacher provided welcome diversion from frontier hardships. One April afternoon, as Jackson delivered a repaired arithmetic slate to the schoolhouse after hours, he found Victoria standing outside, staring at a notice nailed to the door. Bad news? He asked, noting her troubled expression. The town council has scheduled an assessment of my teaching methods next week. She handed him the notice. Apparently, some parents have concerns about my progressive curriculum. Jackson scanned the formal language. What does that mean? It means I've been teaching the girls mathematics beyond basic arithmetic. It means I've encouraged all students to consider higher education. Victoria's voice carried quiet anger. It means someone believes education should know its place, just as they believe women should know theirs. Who would complain? Your students adore you. Jackson had seen the transformation in the local children since Victoria's arrival, their vocabulary expanding, their curiosity awakened. Harold Mills, for one. He was quite vocal at church that his daughter has no need for algebra when her future lies in marriage and motherhood. Victoria's shoulders slumped slightly. Perhaps Boston's constraints have simply followed me west in different forms. Without thinking, Jackson reached out to touch her arm. Don't give up. The frontier needs educators like you. People who see beyond mere survival to what we might become. Victoria looked up at him, surprise softening into something warmer. That's the most philosophical thing I've ever heard you say, Jackson Aldridge. I have my moments, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Though they're admittedly rare. Their eyes held for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. Jackson felt a dangerous warmth spreading through his chest, the very feeling he'd sworn to avoid after losing his family. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability led to devastation when the harsh realities of frontier life inevitably struck. He stepped back, clearing his throat. I could speak to the council. My father served with several members. They might listen. Thank you, but no. Victoria straightened, her composure returning. This is my battle. I didn't come west to be rescued, remember? Not even by a friend. The word felt significant as it left his lips. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Are we friends, Jackson? I believe we are, Victoria. The assessment came and went, with Victoria defending her methods so eloquently that even Harold Mills grudgingly conceded her competence. The incident seemed to strengthen her position in the community rather than weaken it, and by early summer, she had organized a small lending library in a corner of the schoolhouse. Jackson found himself drawn to her resilience, her determination to bring refinement to the frontier without surrendering to its harshness. Their encounters grew more frequent, less coincidental. He brought her fresh vegetables from his garden. She lent him books she thought he might enjoy. They were careful to maintain proprieties, always meeting in public, keeping conversations light, but the connection between them deepened nonetheless. On Independence Day, the town gathered for a celebration in the small park beside the church. Tables groaned with potluck offerings. Bunting decorated the bandstand, and as night fell, the young men prepared a modest fireworks display. Jackson spotted Victoria among a group of her students, looking radiant in a cream-colored dress with blue trim, her honey blonde hair adorned with a simple ribbon. When she caught sight of him, she excused herself and made her way through the crowd. "You clean up rather well, Mr. Aldridge," she teased, taking in his pressed shirt and polished boots. "Special occasions demand effort," he replied with a smile. "You look lovely." A blush touched her cheeks. "Thank you. Though I confess I missed the more elaborate celebrations in Boston. The orchestras, the grand displays over the harbor. Is that homesickness I detect?" Jackson asked as they strolled toward the refreshment table. "Not homesickness exactly. Just recognition of what I've traded for my freedom." Before Jackson could respond, a commotion erupted near the church. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered with exertion, calling for the sheriff. Word quickly spread. Outlaws had raided the Anderson homestead 5 miles out. The family was safe, having hidden in their root cellar, but their livestock was stolen and their barns set ablaze. Sheriff Tanner immediately called for volunteers to form a posse. Jackson stepped forward without hesitation, along with a dozen other men. "We ride in 15 minutes, the sheriff announced. "These raiders have hit 3 homesteads in as many weeks. It's time we put a stop to it." Victoria caught Jackson's arm as he turned toward the livery stable. "Be careful," she said quietly. "These men sound dangerous." "It's what neighbors do out here," he replied. "We look after each other." Something shifted in her expression, concern mingled with understanding. "Yes, I suppose that's the true frontier spirit, isn't it? Not just surviving alone, but standing together." Jackson impulsively took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'll return soon." As he mounted his horse 15 minutes later, Jackson caught sight of Victoria standing at the edge of the crowd, her cream dress glowing in the twilight. For the first time since the fire, he felt the weight of someone waiting for his safe return. The posse tracked the raiders through the night, following the trail of stolen cattle northward toward the Canadian border. Near dawn, they caught sight of campfire smoke in a sheltered ravine. Sheriff Tanner divided the men, positioning them to surround the camp. As they closed in, gunfire erupted. Jackson dove for cover behind a boulder as bullets splintered the tree beside him. The outlaws were well-armed and desperate. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but felt like hours. When it ended, 2 raiders lay dead, 3 were captured, and the stolen livestock was secured. Among the posse, only minor injuries were sustained, except for Jackson. As they rounded up the cattle for the return journey, he discovered a bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a painful furrow that bled steadily through his torn shirt sleeve. They arrived back in Whiteridge late the following day to a hero's welcome. Families gathered to celebrate the posse's success and the return of the stolen property. Jackson, lightheaded from blood loss and exhaustion, barely registered the crowd until a familiar voice cut through his fog. "Jackson, you're hurt." Victoria pushed through the onlookers, her face pale with concern. "It's nothing," he mumbled, swaying slightly in the saddle. "Just a scratch." Dr. Matthews took charge, directing Jackson to his office while the sheriff dealt with the prisoners. Victoria followed, insisting on helping despite the doctor's protests about propriety. "I assisted at the Boston Medical Society clinic for 2 years, she informed the doctor crisply. "I'm quite capable of cleaning a wound and preparing bandages." Too tired to argue, Matthews relented. As Victoria gently cleaned the bullet graze, her hands steady despite her obvious worry, Jackson found himself studying her face. "You're supposed to be teaching arithmetic, not playing nurse," he said weakly. "Hush. You've lost blood and need rest, not conversation." But her voice was gentle, and when the doctor turned away to prepare stitching materials, she whispered, "I was worried for you." The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken emotion. Jackson wanted to respond, to tell her how her face had been in his thoughts during the long pursuit, but the doctor returned, and the moment passed. When he was finally patched up, Victoria insisted on seeing him home. "He shouldn't ride alone," she told the doctor firmly. "I can drive him in Mr. Peterson's wagon and have someone bring it back." Too exhausted to protest, Jackson found himself seated beside Victoria as she competently handled the team through the gathering dusk. The gentle rocking of the wagon and the warmth of her presence beside him lulled him into a drowsy state between waking and sleeping. "Why did you really come west, Victoria?" he murmured, the question emerging from his thoughts without filter. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, because I was engaged once before, to a man I truly loved. He died in a carriage accident 2 weeks before our wedding. Jackson turned to look at her, fully awake now despite his exhaustion. Boston became unbearable, she continued, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every street, every park held memories. My parents thought another engagement would help me forget, but she shook her head. I couldn't bear the thought of replacing him so easily. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, it seemed like providence, a chance to go somewhere with no memories, no ghosts, and no expectations, Jackson added, understanding dawning. Yes, out here, no one knew me as poor Miss Sinclair, the tragic almost bride. I could simply be myself. She glanced at him briefly. That's why I said I wasn't running from something, but toward something, toward the freedom to heal in my own way, at my own pace. They reached his ranch as the last light faded from the sky. Despite his protests, Victoria insisted on helping him inside and ensuring he had what he needed for the night. Standing in his cabin, which suddenly seemed rough and inadequate in her presence, Jackson felt the walls he'd built around his heart crumbling further. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. Victoria smiled, but her eyes held concern. Promise me you'll rest. No ranch work until that arm heals. Doctor's orders? Schoolteacher's orders, she corrected with mock severity. Far more frightening. As she turned to leave, Jackson called after her. Victoria? I understand now. About needing to heal in your own way. After the fire, I thought the only safe path was isolation. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the deepening twilight. And now I'm beginning to think I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile but honest. Victoria nodded once, then slipped away into the night, leaving Jackson with the unsettling realization that his carefully constructed solitude had been irreparably breached. Summer stretched into autumn, bringing with it the golden hues of changing aspens and the urgency of harvest preparations. Jackson's arm healed cleanly, leaving only a pale scar to mark the encounter with the cattle thieves. His friendship with Victoria deepened, evolving into something neither of them named but both acknowledged through small gestures. His regular deliveries of firewood to the schoolhouse, her sending meals with students who lived near his ranch when she knew he was working late on harvest. The townsfolk watched their dance with knowing smiles, making private wagers on when Jackson Aldridge might finally overcome his reserve and court the schoolteacher properly. Victoria, for her part, maintained her independent stance, but her eyes followed Jackson whenever he entered a room, and her laugh came more readily in his presence. In late September, disaster struck without warning. Victoria had organized an educational outing for her older students to collect botanical specimens along the river. The day was clear, the children enthusiastic, and Victoria had carefully planned the expedition with safety in mind. No one could have predicted the flash flood that came roaring down the canyon, the result of heavy rains in the mountains days earlier. The water surged without warning, cutting off Victoria and 3 students who had crossed to the far bank. Jackson was returning from delivering cattle to the railway station when he heard the news: schoolchildren trapped by rising waters, the teacher and 3 pupils still unaccounted for. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward the river, his heart pounding with a fear he'd not felt since the night of the fire. He arrived to find parents gathered on the riverbank, the sheriff organizing rescue attempts. The water raged brown and furious, carrying debris and making any crossing attempt perilous. Where are they? Jackson demanded, scanning the far shore. Sheriff Tanner pointed upstream. They climbed higher when the water rose. Miss Sinclair got them up on that rock outcropping, but the water's still rising. We've sent riders to bring rope from town. Jackson assessed the situation quickly. The outcropping where Victoria and her students huddled was a good 15 feet above the current water level, but the flood showed no signs of receding. Waiting for equipment might prove fatal. There's a narrower point upstream, he said, already remounting his horse. If I can get across there, I can reach them from above. It's too dangerous, Aldridge, the sheriff warned. That current will take you straight to hell. Then I'll be careful not to fall in. Jackson's tone brooked no argument. As he prepared to ride out, he caught sight of Victoria across the churning waters. Even at this distance, he could see her maintaining calm for her students' sake, though the danger of their position was evident. The crossing point he remembered was indeed narrower, but no less treacherous. The water foamed and surged, clawing at the banks. Jackson studied the currents, calculating his chances. His horse, a steady mountain-bred gelding, sensed his tension but waited obediently for commands. "We can do this, boy," he murmured, gathering the reins. "Steady now." They entered the water cautiously. For the first few yards, the crossing seemed manageable, the horse finding secure footing. Then they hit the main current. The force of it slammed against them, nearly sweeping horse and rider downstream. The gelding fought valiantly, powerful legs churning as Jackson guided him toward the far bank. For a heart-stopping moment, they lost all progress, suspended in the current's grip. Then the horse lunged forward, finding purchase on submerged rocks. 3 more desperate strides brought them to shallower water, and finally to the safety of the opposite shore. Jackson dismounted, his boots sinking into mud as he caught his breath. He could hear shouts from downstream. The waiting parents had seen his crossing, but there was no time to acknowledge them. He secured his horse to a tree and began picking his way along the rocky bank toward the outcropping where Victoria and the children waited. The going was treacherous. Rocks made slick by spray, underbrush tangled and dense in places. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful navigation before he caught sight of them. Victoria standing protectively before 3 children, her skirts and hair sodden, but her posture resolute. "Victoria," he called over the roar of the water. She turned, her face transforming from tense vigilance to astonished relief. "Jackson, how did you?" "Crossed upstream," he explained, making his way carefully down to their position. "Is everyone all right?" Cold and frightened, but unharmed, she replied as he reached them. The children, 2 boys and a girl, all around 12 years old, looked up at him with hope dawning in their eyes. "Mr. Aldridge came to rescue us," one boy whispered with awe. "Miss Sinclair rescued you," Jackson corrected, meeting Victoria's gaze with admiration. "Getting you to high ground was quick thinking. We still need to get across that water," Victoria said pragmatically. "And I don't think we can follow your route upstream. The children aren't strong enough swimmers if we were swept away." Jackson nodded. "The sheriff's organizing equipment. We need to sit tight until they can rig a rope system." As if on cue, shouts came from across the river. Looking over, they saw men uncoiling heavy ropes, preparing to attempt a rescue. "It's going to be all right," Victoria assured the children, her voice steady despite her evident exhaustion. Jackson noticed she was shivering, her light shawl providing little protection against the wind and spray. Without comment, he removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "You'll be cold," she protested. "I'm not the one who's been standing in this spray for hours," he countered. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Concern, gratitude, and something deeper neither was ready to name. The rescue operation took another 2 hours. The sheriff's men managed to secure a rope system, and one by one, they brought the children across, suspended in makeshift harnesses above the raging water. Victoria insisted on being last, watching over her students until all 3 were safely delivered to their parents. When her turn came, she hesitated. "I've never been fond of heights," she admitted to Jackson as he helped secure the harness around her waist. "Focus on the far shore," he advised, his hands gentle but firm as he checked the knots. "And know that I'll be right behind you." Victoria nodded, gathering her courage. "Thank you for coming for us." "I will always come for you, Victoria," Jackson said quietly, the admission slipping out before he could guard it. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the roar of the flood faded away. Then the men on the opposite bank called that they were ready, and the moment broke. Victoria was pulled across the churning waters, Jackson watching anxiously until she reached safety. Only then did he secure himself to make the crossing. By the time he reached the far shore, Victoria was surrounded by grateful parents and townspeople. The mayor was already praising her quick thinking, declaring her a heroine for protecting the children. Jackson slipped through the crowd, content to leave the spotlight on her. But Victoria spotted him and broke away from her well-wishers. "You're not escaping acknowledgement so easily, Jackson Aldridge," she called, causing heads to turn. "This man risked his life crossing the flood to reach us. If not for his courage, we might still be stranded." The crowd erupted in cheers and backslapping. Jackson endured it awkwardly and used to being the center of attention. When the excitement finally died down and people began dispersing, he found himself alone with Victoria again. "You didn't need to do that," he said. "You were the one who saved those children." "We saved them together," she replied simply. "That's what neighbors do out here, isn't it? Stand together?" Jackson smiled, recognizing his own words from months earlier. "Indeed it is, Miss Sinclair." As they walked back toward town, Victoria returned his coat despite her still damp clothing. "You'll need this more than I will. The temperature's dropping." "Always the practical one," he commented, accepting it reluctantly. "One of us needs to be," she said with a small smile. Then, more seriously, "What you said back there, about always coming for me. Did you mean it?" Jackson stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun cast golden light across her features, highlighting the question in her eyes. For a moment, he considered retreat, back to the safety of emotional isolation, where loss couldn't touch him. Instead, he chose honesty. "Yes, I meant it." Victoria studied him, her expression softening. "Despite your belief that it's safer to remain alone, that attachment only leads to pain." "You've been paying attention," he said wryly. "I'm a teacher. It's what I do." Her tone was light, but her eyes remained serious. "You've been rebuilding your walls since the fire, Jackson. I understand why. But walls don't just keep pain out, they keep life out too." The observation struck him with unexpected force. Before he could formulate a response, they were interrupted by Dr. Matthews, who insisted on examining Victoria and the children for signs of exposure. "This conversation isn't finished," Jackson told her as the doctor led her away. Victoria glanced back over her shoulder. "I certainly hope not." That night, alone in his cabin, Jackson confronted the truth of Victoria's words. The walls he'd built had indeed kept out pain, but they'd also prevented healing. His parents would never have wanted him to live half a life, afraid of connection. More troubling was the realization that despite his best efforts, Victoria Sinclair had somehow breached those defenses. The terror he'd felt seeing her stranded by the flood, the relief when she was safe. These weren't the emotions of mere friendship. For the first time in 2 years, Jackson allowed himself to consider a future that included someone else, specifically, a honey-haired schoolteacher with the courage to forge her own path and the wisdom to see through his carefully constructed armor. The next day brought clear skies and the beginning of cleanup efforts along the river. Jackson joined the town's men in clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved from gardens and fields damaged by the flood. Victoria, despite the doctor's orders to rest, organized her students to deliver food to the workers. They saw each other across the busy scenes throughout the day, exchanging glances but no words. By late afternoon, exhaustion was evident in every face. The mayor finally called a halt to the work, promising to resume the following day. As Jackson prepared to return to his ranch, Victoria approached, carrying a basket. "Mrs. Patterson insisted I bring you dinner," she explained. "She says you worked harder than 3 men combined." "That's generous of her," Jackson replied, accepting the basket. An awkward silence fell between them, the first since they'd met. Finally, Victoria spoke. "About yesterday, would you allow me to call on you properly?" Jackson interrupted, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "Not as neighbors or friends, but with intention." Victoria's eyes widened slightly, a blush coloring her cheeks. "That's quite direct, Mr. Aldridge. Nearly drowning makes a man reconsider the value of patience," he said with a hint of a smile. "If you need time to consider—" "Yes," she interrupted. "I would like that very much." The simple acceptance lit something warm in Jackson's chest. "Sunday afternoon, then?" "After church." Victoria nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'll expect you at 2 o'clock." Word of Jackson formally calling on the schoolteacher spread through Whiteridge with predictable speed. By Sunday morning, the church pews buzzed with whispered speculation and approval. The young rancher and the teacher made an attractive pair, everyone agreed, and both had proven their mettle in frontier adversity. Their courtship progressed with proper decorum but unmistakable affection. Sunday afternoon walks, dinner at the hotel restaurant, attendance at community socials, all conducted within the bounds of frontier propriety, but with a growing closeness evident to any observer. For Jackson, each encounter peeled away another layer of his self-imposed isolation. He found himself sharing stories of his childhood, his hopes for the ranch, even the nightmares that still occasionally woke him, the memory of flames consuming his family home. Victoria, in turn, revealed more of her past, her love of literature, her battle for education against her father's preference for marriage, and the lingering grief for her lost fiancé. "Do you think he would approve of your life now?" Jackson asked one crisp October evening as they walked the quiet streets after a community harvest dance. Victoria considered the question seriously. "Thomas believed in living authentically. He would have understood why I needed to forge my own path." She glanced up at Jackson. "And I think he would approve of the company I'm keeping." "High praise indeed," Jackson murmured, his hand finding hers in the twilight. As autumn deepened toward winter, their connection strengthened. Jackson expanded his visits to include practical assistance, chopping firewood for the schoolhouse, repairing broken furniture, ensuring Victoria's small cabin would withstand the coming cold. She, in turn, mended his clothes, shared books from her collection, and introduced refinements to his bachelor existence. Proper tablecloths, curtains for his windows, music from her prized small piano that he helped transport from the schoolhouse to her quarters. By Thanksgiving, the entire town recognized their relationship as a courtship heading toward inevitable conclusion. Several matrons had already begun discreet planning for a spring wedding, though neither Jackson nor Victoria had spoken of marriage. The holiday itself brought the community together for a shared feast in the church hall. Victoria had organized her students to perform recitations and songs, while the town's families contributed dishes representing their diverse backgrounds. Jackson watched with quiet pride as Victoria directed the celebrations, her natural grace and intelligence evident in every interaction. "You're a fortunate man, Aldridge," Sheriff Tanner commented, following Jackson's gaze to where Victoria stood surrounded by admiring students. "She's brought something special to this town." "She has indeed," Jackson agreed, "though I'm not certain I've secured my fortune yet." The sheriff chuckled. "Anyone with eyes can see where you two are headed. Just don't wait too long. Good women are scarce out here." As the festivities wound down, Victoria joined Jackson for the walk back to her cabin. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Your students performed beautifully," Jackson said as they strolled through the quiet streets. "You've accomplished wonders with them in just a year." "They're eager to learn," Victoria replied, her voice warm with affection for her pupils. "That makes teaching a joy rather than a chore." They reached her door, and Jackson hesitated, reluctant to end the evening. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "An early Christmas gift." He withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package and placed it in her gloved hands. Victoria looked up in surprise. "You shouldn't have. Open it," he urged gently. She unwrapped the paper with careful fingers, revealing a small book bound in blue leather. Her eyes widened as she read the title. "Sonnets from the Portuguese. Elizabeth Barrett Browning," she whispered. "How did you know?" "You mentioned once that you'd left your poetry collections behind in Boston. The bookseller in Helena found this one for me." Jackson watched her expression anxiously. "Is it acceptable?" Victoria cradled the volume as if it were made of glass. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." She looked up at him, eyes bright in the moonlight. "Thank you, Jackson." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken emotion. Then, with gentle deliberation, Victoria rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss as delicate as a snowflake. Before Jackson could respond, she had slipped inside her door with a whispered good night. Jackson stood motionless for a long moment, his heart thundering in his chest. The brief kiss had shattered the last of his reservations. He knew with sudden clarity that he wanted Victoria Sinclair in his life permanently, not just as a courtship that satisfied town propriety, but as his wife, his partner in building a future. The realization both exhilarated and terrified him. But before he could formulate a proposal worthy of her, events intervened in unexpected ways. 3 days before Christmas, Jackson rode into town with a carefully considered plan. He had spoken with the minister about his intentions, selected a modest ring from the jeweler in Helena, and prepared a speech that he hoped would convey the depth of his feelings. His parents' wedding bands, salvaged from the fire, rested in his pocket alongside the new ring, symbols of continuity and fresh beginnings. As he approached Whiteridge, he noticed unusual activity around the hotel. A stagecoach had arrived, not the regular weekly service, but a private conveyance with matched horses that spoke of wealth and importance. Curiosity piqued. Jackson tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside to inquire. Eastern visitors, Mr. Peterson informed him with evident excitement. A gentleman from Boston, asking after our schoolteacher. Quite distinguished, with a valet and everything. A cold weight settled in Jackson's stomach. Did he give a name? Sinclair, Peterson replied, confirming Jackson's suspicion. Said he's the lady's father. Imagine that. Traveling all this way in winter. Jackson thanked him automatically, his mind racing. Victoria had mentioned her father only in terms of their estrangement, his arranged match, her disinheritance. Why would the man journey to Montana territory now, after more than a year of silence? His instinct was to seek Victoria immediately, to offer support or protection if needed. But propriety demanded restraint. This was a family matter, and despite their closeness, he had no official standing in Victoria's life. Reluctantly, Jackson completed his errands and returned to his ranch, his proposal plans set aside. That evening, he found himself unable to concentrate on even routine tasks, his thoughts constantly returning to Victoria and the unexpected arrival of her father. Just after sunset, the sound of an approaching wagon roused him from his distracted efforts to mend tack. Opening the door, he was startled to find Victoria herself climbing down from Mr. Peterson's delivery wagon. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she called to the retreating driver. "I appreciate the ride." Jackson stepped out into the yard, concern evident in his expression. "Victoria, is everything all right?" She turned to him, her face pale but composed in the lantern light. "May I come in? There are matters I need to discuss with you." The formality in her tone alarmed him. Of course. Inside his cabin, Victoria removed her cloak but remained standing, her posture rigid with tension. Jackson waited, giving her space to speak first. "My father has arrived in Whiteridge," she finally said. "I heard. Peterson mentioned it." Jackson studied her face, trying to gauge her emotions. Did he explain his purpose? Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Oh yes, quite clearly." She began pacing the small confines of the cabin. "It seems my intended husband died 6 months ago. A riding accident. Father has been searching for me since then, to bring me back to my rightful place in society." "I see." Jackson kept his voice neutral, though his heart raced with apprehension. "And how do you feel about his arrival?" Victoria stopped pacing to face him directly. "He's offered full reinstatement as his daughter and heir. My trust fund restored, my position in Boston society secured. All I need do is return with him on tomorrow's stage." The implication hung heavily between them. Jackson felt as though the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. "That's generous of him," he managed. "Is it? Or is it manipulation?" Victoria's green eyes flashed. "He cut me off without a penny when I refused to marry according to his wishes. Now that it's convenient for him, now that he's growing older and has no other children, he suddenly remembers his daughter. Yet you're considering it," Jackson observed quietly. Victoria's expression softened. "I'd be lying if I said the security didn't tempt me. Teaching here has been rewarding but difficult. The winters are harsh, the pay meager, the comforts few." Each word struck Jackson like a physical blow. He had known from the beginning that Victoria was extraordinary, too refined, too educated for frontier life. Yet he had allowed himself to hope that the connection between them might be enough to keep her in Whiteridge. "I understand," he said, striving for dignity despite the ache in his chest. "Boston offers advantages that Montana territory cannot match." "That's not." Victoria broke off, frustration evident in her gesture. "Jackson, I didn't come here to tell you I'm leaving. I came to ask what reasons I have to stay." The question hung between them, both challenge and invitation. Jackson realized with sudden clarity that this was the moment, not the carefully planned proposal he'd envisioned, but an honest reckoning of what they might mean to each other. "When I lost my family," he began slowly, "I convinced myself that isolation was safety, that if I never allowed myself to care deeply again, I could never be hurt that badly again." He moved closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "But then you arrived, stubborn, proud, refusing to be anyone's charity case." A small smile touched Victoria's lips at the memory. You showed me that walls don't just keep pain out, Jackson continued. They keep life out too. And I've been more alive this past year, knowing you, than in all the time since the fire. He took her hands in his touch gentle but certain. I love you, Victoria. Not as a replacement for what I've lost, but as a second chance at a life that includes joy and connection. I'd planned to ask you properly, with a ring and pretty words, but the truth is simple. I want to build a future with you. Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Even knowing I come with complications, an estranged father, Boston expectations, a past I'm still reconciling. Especially knowing those things, Jackson replied. They're part of what made you the woman standing before me now. The woman I love. For a long moment, Victoria stood silent, her hands warm in his. Then she withdrew one hand to reach into her pocket, producing a folded letter. This arrived on the same stage as my father, she said, her voice steady. It's from the Territorial Superintendent of Education, offering me the position of head teacher at the new academy in Helena. Better pay, better accommodations, a real school building with multiple classrooms. Jackson felt his hopes falter again. Helena is a considerable opportunity. It is, Victoria agreed. And it's also a 3-hour train ride from Whiteridge. She held his gaze steadily, close enough that a rancher with business in the territorial capital might visit regularly. Close enough that perhaps, in time, that rancher might consider expanding his operations to include land near Helena. Understanding dawned slowly. You're not returning to Boston. No, I'm not, Victoria confirmed, a smile breaking through her serious expression. My father built his life according to his values. I intend to build mine according to my own. And those values include? Jackson prompted, hardly daring to hope. Independence, purpose, and love. Victoria stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. I love you too, Jackson Aldridge. Not as a replacement for what I've lost, but as a gift I never expected to find. Joy surged through Jackson, bright and fierce. Without conscious thought, he drew her into his arms, lifting her in an exuberant embrace that pulled a laugh from her lips. Does this mean you accept my rather unplanned proposal? He asked when he finally set her down. It does, Victoria replied, her hands resting on his chest. Though I expect a proper ring at some point, Mr. Aldridge. Jackson reached into his pocket, producing the simple gold band he'd carried all day. Will this suffice for now, Miss Sinclair? Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. You already had. I told you I had plans, he said with a smile, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but neither of them cared. They simply required some adjustment. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, tender yet passionate, respectful of their pasts yet eager for what lay ahead. When they finally parted, both were breathless. What will you tell your father? Jackson asked, his forehead resting against hers. The truth, Victoria replied simply. That I found my place and my purpose. That I'm not the society daughter he remembers, and I never will be again. Her eyes met his with quiet determination. And that I've accepted a proposal from a Montana rancher who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. Not anyway, Jackson corrected gently. Because of who you are, in your entirety. The following morning, they rode into town together to meet with Victoria's father. Richard Sinclair proved to be a formidable figure, tall, distinguished, with the same wheat-blonde hair as his daughter, now silvered at the temples. His initial dismissal of Jackson was swift and cutting. A rancher? Really, Victoria? After the education and advantages you've been given? His gaze took in Jackson's practical clothing with evident disdain. I expected better judgment, even from you. Victoria straightened, her hand finding Jackson's in a gesture of solidarity. Jackson Aldridge is one of the most respected men in the county, father. His ranch is prospering, and his character is beyond reproach. A small ranch in a smaller town, Richard scoffed. Is this truly the future you envision for yourself? Frontier hardship and obscurity. Before Victoria could respond, Jackson spoke quietly but firmly. Mr. Sinclair, I understand your concern for your daughter's welfare. But Victoria has built something meaningful here. Respect, purpose, independence. Those aren't small achievements, even by Boston standards. The older man's eyebrows rose at Jackson's articulate response. Young man, you speak well for a frontiersman. But my daughter was raised for greater things than being a rancher's wife in the wilderness. I was raised to think for myself, Victoria countered. Something you encouraged until my thoughts diverged from yours. She softened her tone slightly. Father, I'm grateful you came. Truly. And I'm willing to rebuild our relationship if you're sincere in wanting that. But I won't return to Boston. Richard Sinclair studied his daughter's resolute expression, then turned his assessment to Jackson. And you, Mr. Aldridge, what do you offer my daughter beyond this rustic existence? Partnership, Jackson replied simply. Respect for her intelligence and independence. A home where her talents are valued, not confined. And love without conditions or expectations of conformity. Something shifted in the older man's expression, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant recognition. You speak of partnership, an unusual concept in marriage. Perhaps in Boston drawing rooms, Jackson acknowledged. But on the frontier, partnerships are what allow us to survive and thrive. Victoria has taught me that walls built for protection also prevent growth. I won't build such walls around her potential. A tense silence followed his words. Then, unexpectedly, Richard Sinclair gave a short laugh. Well, it seems my daughter has found someone as stubborn as herself. He turned to Victoria. You're certain of this course? Helena is hardly Boston, but it at least offers some civilization. I'm certain of Jackson, she replied steadily. The rest will determine together. After further discussion, sometimes heated, occasionally revealing unexpected common ground, Richard Sinclair departed on the afternoon stage. He left behind his contact information, a promise to correspond regularly, and a wedding gift that stunned them both. Funds for a substantial expansion of Jackson's ranch and a small trust in Victoria's name to ensure her independent security. He's a complicated man, Victoria reflected as they watched the stagecoach disappear down the road. Controlling, certainly, but perhaps not entirely without understanding. He raised a remarkable daughter, Jackson observed. That speaks to some wisdom, at least. The winter passed in a flurry of preparations for their spring wedding, for Victoria's transition to the Helena Academy, and for the expansion of Jackson's ranching operations. The town of Whiteridge celebrated their engagement with genuine pleasure, seeing in their union a symbol of the frontier's promise. They were married on the first day of May, with apple blossoms scenting the air and meadowlarks singing across the newly green pastures. Victoria wore a gown of ivory satin, simple but elegant, with a crown of wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair. Jackson, clean-shaven and solemn in his new suit, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes. The entire town attended, along with Richard Sinclair, who had returned from Boston for the occasion. Even Victoria's students participated, forming an honor guard with ribbons and flowers as the newlyweds exited the church. At the reception held on Jackson's ranch, now expanded with a new, larger house that incorporated Victoria's books and piano, the couple found a moment of quiet amidst the celebrations. Are you happy, Mrs. Aldridge? Jackson asked, his arm around his wife's waist as they watched their guests dancing in the decorated barn. Victoria leaned against him, contentment evident in every line of her body. Completely. Though I still maintain I'm not your charity case, Mr. Aldridge. Jackson laughed, remembering their first encounter. And I still maintain you're my second chance, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. At life, at love, at everything that matters. Then we're agreed, Victoria said, turning in his arms to face him fully. Partners in all things, from this day forward. From this day forward, Jackson echoed, sealing the promise with a kiss that held all the hope and possibility of the frontier stretching before them. Challenging, perhaps, but faced together.